El mundo de hoy nos ha enseñado que es necesario estar preparados para el cambio. El cambio es movimiento, el movimiento es vida. La vida es la que nos empuja hacia la excelencia. La excelencia en salud al servicio de la comunidad. En el transcurso de 4 décadas, nos hemos consolidado como referente en la prestación de servicios de alta complejidad. Para alcanzar nuestras metas, sustentamos nuestro trabajo en 4 pilares: la excelencia en la atención, la docencia, la investigación e innovación y la responsabilidad social. Como institución hospitalaria, nuestra vocación primordial es satisfacer las necesidades de nuestros usuarios, bajo un modelo de atención humanizado, centrado en el paciente. Para hacer más eficiente nuestro compromiso, apostamos por una estrategia que nos permita atender a cada familia, desde cualquier lugar. Por eso implementamos una ruta que nos conduce por el camino de la investigación y la innovación en el campo de la ciencia médica. No le tememos a los retos que nos plantea el día a día en nuestra labor. Somos un hospital universitario, lo cual nos permite asegurar la continuidad de nuestra misión. Creemos en una formación académica humanizada, ética y científica, puesta al servicio de la comunidad. Estamos comprometidos con la responsabilidad social que tenemos con nuestro entorno inmediato. Por eso, desarrollamos diversos programas de atención para la población más vulnerable. Nuestra permanente búsqueda de la excelencia nos ha llevado a romper barreras en campos muy prometedores: la telemedicina y la atención a pacientes internacionales. Los tiempos cambian, el mundo se transforma. Estamos preparados para afrontar los nuevos retos. La innovación y la calidez humana hacen parte de nuestra existencia. Fundación Valle del Lili. Excelencia en salud, al servicio de la comunidad.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this space called Making the Invisible Visible. Let's talk about grief and infertility. I'm Dr. Karen Molina, leader of the Pediatric Palliative Care Program at Fundación Valle del Lili Hospital in Cali, Colombia. It's a pleasure to introduce you Dr. Julie Bittman. She's a psychologist with a PhD from George Washington University and an internship at Loyola University's Counseling Center. She's a member of various associations in the United States. She has an extensive experience working with a variety of areas of concern, including reproductive challenge, infertility, pregnancy, loss, birth trauma, and postpartum issues, depression, anxiety, self-imagine, body imaging, adjustments, and issues surrounding life transitions. Also is joined with us Laura Sanin, director of the Baby Bear Foundation, who support us in the realization of this event. Welcome to Dr. Julie Bittman. The audience is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So today we're going to talk about infertility and grief. I have nothing to disclose. I did not use AI for my slides. I want to start with some questions for you all to think about. So the first part is, in what ways has your own life been touched by death and grief or bereavement? What did you find helpful during the difficult times associated with your loss or losses? How might it translate to patient care? If you or your partner have not had difficulty conceiving, imagine what it would be like to go through the experience of infertility. What kinds of thoughts, feelings, and emotions might you experience? How would you deal with the loss, although it's a series of losses? And how would you want to be treated by your healthcare providers? So I wanted to start with a fertility story. And this is one of many, many, many possibilities of what it could look like.
Welcome back. Well, you likely know someone who struggled or is struggling to have a baby. And when it comes to infertility, there can be enormous emotional, psychological, and financial challenges. Joining me now to talk about this more is Brooke Sackrider, mother of a 4-year-old who's here to share her personal story. Good morning to you, Brooke. Tell me, just when did you and your husband decide, hey, you know what, we want kids?
Well, I think it was always part of our plan. We got married and met when we were in our late 20s, and we weren't in a rush. We thought we had time. We worked, we traveled, we did all those things that, newlyweds do. And then we weren't trying not to get pregnant. And so after a couple of years and it hadn't been successful, we decided to kind of look and see what our options were. And we tried our first round of IVF.
And was that in your mid-30s that you did the first round?
Yes, the first round was probably about 32.
What struggles did you come across with the IVF and just trying to conceive?
So I was diagnosed with low ovarian reserve. And then on my husband's side, he had some mobility issues with his sperm. So it was one of those things that no matter how hard we tried it probably wasn't going to happen naturally for us. So when we went in and we first did our initial round of IVF, they were always successful for us. So the first time we ended up getting pregnant with twins. And so that was really exciting. And we thought, well, that was easy. And we ended up losing the first one at 10 weeks and the second one at 13 weeks. So you start to develop the perspective of, okay, this is more of a marathon and not something that is going to be a quick fix.
And can you talk about that more, just about maybe some of the emotional and psychological struggles that also come along with trying to have a baby and having just these maybe IVF rounds not being successful?
Yeah, I think having a really strong support system is super important, and just being really open and having that open line of communication with your husband, because even though everything is happening to the female, as far as all of the medication and the shots and the doctor's appointments, from a male perspective, they want to fix everything. And so with everything happening to the female, I encourage people to have that open communication and just really realize that they're struggling through this process as well, because it's very emotional. And not only that, but you're souped up on all of these hormone drugs that aren't helping either. So.
And now the second IVF round was very successful. You now have a beautiful 4-year-old boy.
Yes, his name is Jackson.
For couples who are trying to conceive, possibly in the same shoes as you were prior to having your son, is there anything that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah. So, like I said, I think a good, strong support system is important, but also for, and I think even more important, not only for couples, but for women who haven't necessarily met the man of their dreams yet. I strongly encourage people and talk to people about freezing their eggs early when you're in your early 30s, so that you have options later on, whether you're ready now or not. Going ahead and taking that step so that the door's wide open for you when you're ready, and those eggs will always be, in their early 30s.
And where did you get your IFB or get connected to the resources? Was it?
So when I had my son, Dr. Martin at the Fertility Center of San Antonio, we love them over there. So it was a great experience with them.
Well, thank you, Brooke, for sharing your story with us. And welcome back. Well,
no, we don't need to watch it again. So that just gives you a sampling. Really, it's like dipping our toe into the water to understand what a fertility journey might look like. I think there's a couple of ways that can be useful to situating what this all is. And my colleague Janet Jaffe, I think, really was able to distill it as one of the reasons that infertility or pregnancy loss is so difficult for people is because their reproductive story has gone awry. So I imagine none of you have ever heard of what a reproductive story is. It is something that all humans have. They might not be aware of what it is, but it's still percolating in the mind. So it starts when we're really young, and how we develop the skills of nurturance, of patience, the kinds of skills that parents need. And so we'll see in play, and it doesn't matter what gender the child is, we will see in their play how they practice some of these skills. So even if it's someone playing with two cars or two trains and they crash into one another, the nurturing piece, the taking care of piece is when inevitably those trains go to the repair shop and they get fixed. And that is something that parents do, is we want to fix, we want to heal as best we can in terms of our children. We want them to be able to do whatever they can do. The reproductive story continues as people age, and maybe in like the elementary school years, it might be a little more concrete, like ideas like, I want to have 11 children. Or it might be really concrete, like, I don't ever want to have children. And both are very valid reproductive stories. As people continue to grow, they continue to kind of look at that story that they might have created for themselves. And so they might edit it as they get older and learn more and be like, whoa, 11 kids? That's a lot. Maybe I'll try for 2. And should that person be able to partner, and in this instance, I'm talking about heterosexual couples, should they be able to partner, then each member of that couple has their own reproductive story that they bring to the relationship. And so then the couple has to kind of negotiate. Okay, so what were each of us thinking about kids? Do we want kids? How many kids? And oftentimes couples will have different ideas about how many kids. So you might hear one person say, I just want 2. That's the family I grew up in. That's what I know. And so the other person in the couple may say, well, I want 4 because that's the family I grew up in. And I loved the loudness and the chaos of it. And then the couple has to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? And oftentimes it's, let's have one and then we'll revisit this conversation. Have one and see how that goes. When that plan, when that dream doesn't go as planned. So I think most people assume that if I'm going to have a baby, it will happen with me and my husband. Those will be the only players that are involved in it. And 9 months later, I will birth a baby. So when that doesn't occur as the way it's imagined, as I described, when it might be, oh, wow, it's taking us a long time to get pregnant. Or, oh, wow, I don't seem to have a period now that I'm off birth control. What's going on with that? There are so many different factors to think about when infertility might be at play. So for a individual and a couple to learn that it's not going to be just the 2 of them creating this child, they're going to need a little assistance. Already there's some grief there. This idea of, well, we were supposed to do it in a particular way, and that's not going to happen. I also want to talk about just the psychology of pregnancy in general. I don't think we necessarily think about it as having different kinds of, that pregnancy has a psychological piece to it. So the context of pregnancy is that it's normal. It is a normal thing for people to go through. The other piece of this that's really hard for people to accept is that there is a spectrum of normal in pregnancy. And that spectrum includes loss, because miscarriage is pretty typical, or perhaps infertility, because infertility is pretty typical as well. So if we're thinking of it as a big phase, big stage of development, then yes, it is all normal, but that's not how people feel when they're struggling. In pregnancy, it is really typical for people to regress, meaning going to a bit of a younger place within them. It might be like, not wanting to clean things or not wanting to do the normal kinds of activities that they want to do. It might feel a little more like, ooh, this person's a little more argumentative than they tend to be. And again, that is normal, that is expected, because we kind of have to grow into our role as parents. So it's useful that pregnancy takes 9 to 10 months so that we have time to grow into those roles. And the idea of parenthood, it's a really interesting kind of concept that parenthood is a normal development of an individual's narcissistic identity. So, we all want to feel good about ourselves. That's considered to be healthy narcissism. And so part of that might look like, okay, I'm having a child, and that means there's a part of me in that child that goes on and on and on forever. It's like my genes get passed down forever. It's this sense of kind of immortality. The other piece of parenthood, too, is we either want to parent the way we were parented if we had secure and parents that were emotionally attuned to us. We want to correct the things that might have gone wrong as we were parented. So if you've ever said, even as a child, oh, when I become a parent, I will never do this. I just gotta, no, never. And the purpose of that is to try to heal those early childhood wounds. There is a psychologist named Erik Erikson who came up with different psychosocial stages in life. And the idea is each one of them had to be completed in one or the other direction. And so when we're thinking about pregnancy, we're thinking really about the stage of generativity versus stagnation, the idea of replicating ourselves, of being generative, of giving something of ourselves versus nothing, stagnation, just being flat. There's a lot of acronyms in assisted reproductive technology. So ART stands for assisted reproductive technology. LH stands for luteinizing hormones. IUI, intrauterine insemination. GC refers to a gestational carrier. ICSI, ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. That's a mouthful. IP would be an intended parent or intended parents. IVF, in vitro fertilization. TTC, trying to conceive. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. FET, frozen embryo transfer. HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. That is what pregnancy tests detect. It's how at-home pregnancy tests can tell us we're pregnant. PGTA is pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy. Aneuploidy means chromosomally unexpected. So typically we expect all of us have 46 chromosomes, or many of us have 46 chromosomes. Having 47 or having 45 is considered to be, okay, there might be some other things happening. And this is on the chromosomal level. And when I think about the chromosomal level, it's kind of like when we're building a house and the chromosomes are like, the pillars that are holding the house up, the flooring, it's just kind of the outline, the skeleton of the house. So another thing that's really interesting is that the medical definition of infertility just changed about a year and a half ago. And it used to be that infertility was looked at as an age issue, that if you are younger than 35 and you had been trying without any kind of barriers of having sex and not getting pregnant, then the thought was, and you tried that for a year, then the thought was, okay, the next step is to see a reproductive endocrinologist for infertility. And the idea was if you're older than 35, you have 6 months before you reach out. However, that's a very limiting and very medical perspective that only applies to heterosexual cisgender couples. disease is a condition or a status, which is a big thing to add in. Either the inability to achieve a successful pregnancy based upon patient's medical, sexual, and reproductive history, age, physical findings, diagnostic testing, or any combination of these factors. The need for medical intervention, including but not limited to the use of donor gametes, so that would be someone else's sperm or egg cells, or donor embryos to achieve a successful pregnancy, either as an individual or with a partner. And this can apply to heterosexual couples, this can apply to single parents by choice, and this can apply as well to same-sex couples or others in the LGBTQ community. So those are the time restraints. I've told you that. And the idea is that nothing in the definition can be used to deny or delay treatment. So it's another thing that's really important is that treatment is available for anyone. So a lot of times when we're thinking about infertility, we're thinking about it from the point of view of, well, it's got to be a woman's issue. I think we love to have this idea that if a couple is struggling with infertility, then clearly something is wrong with the woman. Yet, what we see here is a graphic, and it shows that a third of issues are male factor infertility. So that might be sperm motility, sperm mobility, the number of sperm that's produced, the way that sperms move, and their morphology, what they actually look like. So a two-headed sperm or a two-tailed sperm is not as desirable as one that is a single head, single tail. A third of the time, it's female factor. So the same as men, women can have infertility relating to them the same as men. And a third of the time, it's a combination of either male and female factors, or it is unknown. So I think, again, that's something important, is that we know a lot, but we don't know it all. So for people who are unfamiliar with IVF, in vitro fertilization, and how assisted reproductive technology works, this is a really kind of quick teaching of it. So if you're going through in vitro fertilization, what that means is we need to retrieve eggs from a woman's body, and then a man needs to ejaculate so we can use his sperm. And in a lab, that egg and sperm will come together. But to start that process, ironically, a woman has to start with birth control. And I hear so many times from my clients, I don't know why I have to start with birth control because clearly I'm not getting pregnant. So birth control is more about hormonal regulation in this circumstance. It's not about preventing pregnancy. The idea about ART is that a physician can kind of control and take over a person's cycle so that they can be impregnated at the best time, the most desirable time, the most likely time that they'll be able to become pregnant. So first, what we do is we have to get the eggs. And I say we like I'm a part of it. I don't do any of this stuff. So the first thing is a person needs to have their ovulation inducted. So this is a series of shots. It's a series of hormones that people have to take. It's monitoring nearly every single day, if not every single day. And monitoring tends to mean an ultrasound, and that tends to be a vaginal one. Once ovulation is induced, physicians go in and they retrieve the eggs that were created. So more hormones were given to a person than what they would normally create in their body on any given month. The idea being we want as many eggs as possible so that we can create embryos, which is the next step, embryo creation. And embryo creation is, again, putting sperm and egg together. Usually it occurs in a petri dish, which is, I think, again, a sort of funny way when you're expecting that private time together, an intimate time together with your spouse is what's going to make a baby. And then it comes to, well, the embryologist had some intimate time with our cells. It's a really different way of thinking about it too. The tendency in the United States is to create more embryos than a person needs. And the idea behind this is there's always attrition. After the egg retrieval, we will see that not all the eggs are mature. And so if they're immature eggs, those are not going to be ideally used to create an embryo. So there is oftentimes attrition at that part. So let's pretend somebody ovulated 20 eggs. And after attrition, they had 15 eggs left. And they're thinking, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to have 15 embryos. And so those embryos get fertilized. They start to grow in a specific kind of cell culture. And, the clinic calls in a couple of days and they say, okay, we want you to know that some of the embryos are rested, which means they stopped growing. And so, okay, well, how many is that? 5 of them arrested. Okay, well, we have 10. That's great, 10. And then after we get to day 5, the infertility center might call and say, out of the 10 we had, only 7 made it to blastocyst. That means 5 days where the embryo is going through cellular division. At that point in time, people have the option to have something called pre-implantation genetic screening or testing for aneuploidy. That, as I mentioned earlier, talks about chromosomal anomalies, what might be normal, what not be. So we have to assume that not all embryos are going to have normal chromosomes. So these embryos, these 5 embryos that were left, they're sent out for testing. And the clinic calls back and they say, well, we have 2 that are considered to be euploid, also chromosomally normal. That was from 20 eggs. 20 eggs to 2 possible embryos. So even in all of this part, there's a lot of loss, there's a lot of waiting, there's a lot of uncertainty. And this takes at least the initial cycle, they might do a mock cycle before. So this can take 2 months, 3 months if you're doing PGS, to get a sense of how many embryos do we actually have. So going through infertility feels like you're on a very twisty, curvy roller coaster. It is filled with highs, the excitement, 20 eggs, wow! The lows, what do you mean we only have 2 embryos out of 20 eggs? And the waiting for tests to come back, waiting for blood work to come back to get a sense of what that means. So there's a lot in which people are waiting. I make the joke with clients. I'm like, oh, you're in the hurry up and wait phase. Yep. So we talk about that a lot too. What's hard for people when they get an infertility diagnosis? And again, I'm really thinking about heterosexual cisgender couples. They're part of a system now. It's not going to be spontaneous. They need help. They have to have some other person come into this intimate, private relationship and help. Oftentimes from women that I work with, there's a feeling of failure. This sense of my body is betraying me, or I am failing my husband. He deserves a baby and I can't give it to him. So maybe we should get divorced so that he can have a chance to have a baby, which doesn't tend to happen, but it really shows the depth of how horrible this experience is. And as I just mentioned, there is so much waiting, which means dealing with uncertainty. It also means losing your peer group. So if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, most of your friends are going to be in this phase of family building. And when you look around and all of your friends are getting pregnant and it's so easy for them, and you've already been with your clinic for a year, it's it's really hard to talk to those friends. It's really hard. While you're happy for them, you're happy for what they're going to get, you also are envious because that is what you want. And you are trying so hard and you're not able to manifest it, to having it come. There's a lot of unseen or unacknowledged grief within infertility. So there is that grief of it's not going to happen between the two of us. There is the grief of, okay, there's been attrition at every kind of thing we've done. So we're having fewer and fewer. Sometimes clients are not able to create any healthy embryos. And so that's also a grief that people experience. And there's another grief that when an embryo is transferred, if 10 days later after the blood test to check for pregnancy, and you're not pregnant, that really feels like a pregnancy loss to the couple because they've created a future for that embryo. They had visions of what they were going to do with that potential child. Oftentimes you get the picture of the embryo, so you start to build some bonding with it and this a sense of what parenting might look like or be for you. For some couples, if sperm isn't able to be found, because sometimes people are azoospermic, which means they're not able to produce sperm. And other times it might be that, okay, my eggs are not able to produce chromosomally normal babies. So there can be that lost in going with a third party and going with this idea of I need someone else to help me have my family. I'm not going to have a genetic connection. This is not really going to be an expression of me and my husband's love for one another, which I think a lot of times people feel children are, is like, this is a physical manifestation of the love we have. It's also the loss of losing the normal experience of conception and even the normal experience of pregnancy. You are so heavily monitored the first trimester, which can feel really good, but then it's not going to be replicated when you get transferred to the obstetrician's office. And it's also the loss of my own body and being able to control my own body or being able to control what I do. So because this is such a timed procedure to do, oftentimes people will not leave where they live because they don't want to be too far from the clinic if they need to do a trigger shot to stimulate ovulation. So we know that men, when they have oligospermia or azoospermia, two things, they tend to feel socially isolated and depressed. We know that men are not the ones who necessarily go to their friends and talk about their feelings or talk about these kinds of intimate things. Oftentimes men are conditioned not to. And so that can lead to, well, I don't have anyone to talk about this. None of my friends understand. And I wouldn't even, like, they'll joke about it with me. So this idea of like, oh, you're firing blanks. There's a lot of kind of coded language we use. And the idea is it's supposed to be funny and lighthearted, but it's also really hurtful. Men tend to feel a sense of guilt, shame, anger, a sense of failure, a sense of loss. So not unlike what women feel. They feel diminished and powerlessness. So this sense of being able to use your sperm to create a child is tied somehow with masculinity. Like the idea is the more children you have, the more manly you are. And that's really culturally embedded. And so that part can feel really hard too, of like, I feel like I'm less of a man if I'm not able to get my wife pregnant. And there's a sense too of being stigmatized. Again, we're not talking about this. I can't talk to my friends about this. So there becomes a higher secrecy. This is filled with shame. When we keep a secret, that tends to be something that we have some shame around. And that leads to higher stress. Who can I tell? Who can't I tell? and suppression of feelings, because men have kinds of feelings. I say that sarcastically because, of course, men have all types of feelings. Women tend to go more to the grief, depression. They can be angry, shocked, in denial, or anxious. They sense they have a failure of self as well, and it can lead to a lowering of self-esteem. Some of the language that we used to use and still sometimes gets used also speaks to the idea of, something in a person's body failed, and it's something that they have no control over, which feels even worse. So the language of premature ovarian failure, that means diminished eggs. That feels terrible. Or being told you have an incompetent cervix. I've had clients sit there and be like, cool, how do I make it more competent? You can't. And certainly all of this is stressful and distressing. The longer the treatment is, the more distress, stress, and marital adjustment issues there are. Women tend to have more anxiety and depression, at least clinically diagnosable anxiety and depression, than their partners. Sometimes when we know what is causing the infertility, that makes us even more depressed than when we don't know. Although I think that might be turned around a little bit now, because people who have unidentified feel like they can't come up with a plan, because there's nothing appears out of the ordinary. When people have oh my God, why can't I remember? Polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, because of that being a hormonal disease, it impacts a person's physicality. And as a result of that, people can feel very freakish, not normal, less feminine. And with premature ovarian insufficiency, POI, often feel unsupported by healthcare professionals. And the couple together, this is their first experience of shared crisis and shared trauma, because infertility is both. It's a crisis and it's a trauma. The couple have different grief styles. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. They'll have different styles of emotional expression, as I've mentioned. Both can feel like they're failures and this sense of stuckness. And it really does a lot to a person's identity. If you're trying to go from the identity of, I am who I am and I'm a wife, but I want to be a mother. And so that mother identity feels really far away. And also for the couple, if they're undergoing treatment, sex is no longer fun. Sex becomes something that they might have to do at a certain time if they're doing timed intercourse. But it becomes something that's more on demand than it is as something spontaneous. Just to give a quick thing about grief, formal definitions. I think it's useful to think about grief rather than think about it in gender terms, like, oh, this is how men grieve, this is how women grieve. I think it's more useful to think about it in a more generalized term, that there are instrumental grievers and there are intuitive grievers, neither of which is wrong, and people can vacillate back and forth. So an instrumental griever is someone that kind of needs to keep busy. They need to have some projects. They need to be looking forward. They might like just something to do. They're in motion, and it's this desire to try to fix, or at least to do things so that it is taking care of the sadness that's inside. Intuitive grief is something that we tend to see pretty easily. It's someone that's crying. It's someone that's talking a lot about their loss. So that we consider intuitive. I know plenty of men who are intuitive grievers and plenty of women who are instrumental grievers. So we tend to have a theory when we're looking around grief. It's important to understand that our theory, backed in a theory, it provides some kind of roadmap. So it's something we can give to patients or clients to give them a sense of, this is what we need to do. A theory can help people make sense out of grief because grief has so many contradictions. We can be laughing 1 minute and then sobbing the next. That feels really contradictory. Having a model or a path also gives people hope. Oh, others have done it. Others have thought about it in this way, and this is how it might look. And it helps to explain the many complexities, particularly when we're talking about reproductive issues, especially infertility and pregnancy loss. And it provides a kind of a home base for clinicians in which they can practice from. So most people know of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She has this 5 stages of grief. And what's interesting is that this research was more about being someone who is dying versus what happens after that person dies. But yet the research was misgeneralized to apply to grief after a death versus the grief we might have around dying. We can tell a story about our grief, and stories can be really useful. We can separate out the stories that don't make sense or they don't quite follow, and we always have the opportunity to be the authors of our own stories, which means that we can edit, we can change it. And I tend to pick and choose from a lot of these things when I'm working with people, but I think it's really useful too. Like, grief is not linear, and people go back and forth between a more loss-oriented place where they're doing grief work. Grief is an intrusion. They're breaking bonds or ties. There's a denial, avoidance of any kind of change. So again, these are all back and forth versus a restoration-oriented space where we're really looking at life's changes. We're trying new things. It becomes a distraction for our grief. It could also be denial or avoidance of grief if we're too distracting with ourselves. And from it, we can come up with new roles and identities for ourselves. I love the idea of an attachment theory that, okay, part of why this is so hard is that this was so important to us and it's something that we lost. So instead of the idea of letting go, it's more of a framework on of negotiating and renegotiating what the meaning of the loss is. And that will change over time. The meaning changes over time. So the bond with the one that you've lost can take a new form with time, meaning death. That's a new form, but the connection will always be there. And so when we're thinking about infertility or pregnancy losses, our bonds might be through a sonogram, or again, that picture of the embryo that got transferred, a pregnancy test result. It is not uncommon for people who go through IVF that they can't wait till the ACG. And so they take a pregnancy test, and more often, because they're on all sorts of different hormones to help the body mimic pregnancy, just kind of give it a boost in that. Sometimes that can come back and it seems like it's a positive. With a pregnancy loss, we might have receiving blankets. So again, that's something physical. And if you've miscarried or had a stillbirth or any kind of loss, or you're going through infertility and the transfer didn't stick, it can be really useful to give that child, that being, a name. So part of the dimensions of infertility is that we are grieving the dreams for this wished for child. And this wished for child might have been in our imaginations for many, many, many years, or this wished for child might be a really new thing that we started to think about. For a lot of couples, this is the first crisis they've ever experienced together, which means that they don't know how the other person navigates in crisis. We all tend to have really specific styles around that. And I mentioned earlier, our friendships will change. We lose our peer group. Our relationships with our family might change, particularly if we have family members who are pregnant or are easily able to get pregnant. where this is disenfranchised grief. So this is the grief that is not recognized generally by the larger culture. We don't think about, if you're in an LGBTQ relationship, we don't think about how that non-gestating partner, or that, how the partner tends to feel about it. We don't see grief if an embryo doesn't make it into blastocyst. Oftentimes people are very private about going through infertility, and they limit who they tell and when they tell and what they tell. Oftentimes it's because perhaps in a first round they didn't do this, so it's a new kind of style. And the idea behind it is to try to protect ourselves. And again, the dimensions of a failed transfer, that's also a grief experience. I think it's important to get a sense of what religious beliefs each person in the couple grew up with. What religious beliefs do they hold now? Is religion something that might be useful in terms of healing, or might it be detrimental? Is there a religious practice that's happening today? Is there a spiritual practice that's happening? And religious and spirituality are two very, very different things. And so that's important too, to be able to separate. What have other losses in this religious context, how have they been expressed? So for an example, in Judaism, the funeral has to happen very quickly to the time of death. And there's lots of different rituals that go. With pregnancy loss and infertility, there's not as many rituals. So that too can be really hard. And, are there religious kinds of beliefs or ceremonies that have been helpful in the past or difficult? Might it be useful to have a clergy member come and create a kind of private ceremony with the individual or couple, just to mark the loss, to have it be seen and known? I'm seeing I'm running out of time, so I'm going to leave this slide here. Just you all can read it. But these are the different stressors that we feel, cisgender men, cisgender women, the effects of the loss, and the coping styles used. The other part to think about too are these milestones. So I have clients that are like, oh, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of my first transfer that failed. Or had my pregnancy continued, I had an early miscarriage, but had my pregnancy continued, we would be about where I would be due. There can be anniversary reactions. So having a lot of feelings as these milestones are being reached. Holidays can be hard for a lot of couples. It's the idea of, cool, we're going to do this transfer. We will be pregnant by Christmas. And then for Christmas gifts, we can share the news. And so there's a real sadness if that plan doesn't come to be. I mentioned other people's pregnancies can be really, really challenging. So seeing other people, particularly other people who have been going through infertility, that's also really challenging. It's that envy that, oh, they're done with this and I'm still stuck in it. And particularly if someone had been pregnant for a short time and they might have had some friends that were also pregnant, there's a sense of seeing those babies and children grow, and the feeling of, oh, had my pregnancy continued, I would have a child this is their first day of kindergarten, or I would have a child that's graduating from high school right now. So that can be really hard as well. In terms of giving comfort, if we think about that innermost circle as the couple, and each circle after it is the people that they're initially close with, and then we get less close as we go to the absolute outside. So the couple gets to dump to anyone who is going to listen. It means they get to talk about, they get to feel about whatever their sadness or grief might look like. It would not be appropriate. The next rung might include potential grandparents or the couple's parents. And it is not okay for the potential grandparents or the couple, each member of the couple's parents to dump on the couple. Oh my God, I'm so sad. This is going to be my grandchild. So that becomes a challenge because the couple cannot support that person. They're going through enough of their own stuff. And so that's why it's seeking out other people's on different rungs of the circle in terms of getting comfort from. There can be a lot of rituals. So this is where spirituality can come in. It can be really useful to talk to patients about potential things they can do. I think particularly with an embryo, there tends not to be a burial for it. So we don't have that kind of ritual. But for some people, putting a note on a balloon and sending it off, that can be really, you can feel really good, like you're sending a note off to that baby you won't know. Planting a tree, giving back to the environment. Rock gardens can be useful. Rituals with water, people can be really creative around that. Maybe it's donating money to a cause for infertility or a cause for loss. So here in the United States, that might be donating to Resolve, or if someone's struggling with PCOS, it might be donating to PCOS research. And sometimes we have walks and runs for various different causes. And so participating in that for some people is really useful too. As we try to help grievers, our most important job is to listen and to create a space where they can grieve openly. It's not our job to give advice, and it's not our job to pretend that everything's normal and none of this happened. If you want to actively help, suggest an action that you can do rather than say the vagueness of, if you need any help, just let me know. Because a grieving person doesn't know what help they need. So it can be, if this is a closer relationship, it can be really useful to say, so I'm going to show up in 2 days and I'm going to do your laundry. Oh, thanks. Resources that can be useful for patients or clients is just remembering to tap into their breath. That can really help when the grief is becoming too intense. To learn how to ground themselves, to really feel like their feet are on the ground. You can do that when you're sitting in a chair too. You don't have to be standing, but really getting a sense of being in the here and now. That's what grounding does for us. Imagery can be really useful. An idea of, I'm going to a peaceful place that I've created in my imagination, and that tends to calm my nervous system. Expressive arts are fabulous. And doing exercises that have you focus on something that is happy or useful, and then briefly look at the thing that is distressing, going back and forth. That can be really useful too. If we're working with grieving people, we have to take care of ourselves. That might mean having others that we consult with. Maybe it's listservs that we participate on. Are there professional organizations? So in the United States, there's the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, which is fabulous. Advocacy and support groups, Resolve is a really big one. I mentioned that one before too. So cool. I have some time left. Any questions? Anything that people want to know? Something I might not have been clear about? Here's how you can contact me.
Hi, Julie. Thank you very much. What a wonderful talk. I think this space was amazing. We have some questions from the public. So, the first question is, how is infertility grief different from other types of grief, such as grief over a specific physical loss, for example?
Yeah, so very, very, very different. When we're thinking about losing a parent or losing an uncle or losing someone that we knew, a friend, we have other people we can grieve with because there are other people that knew that person. But when we're grieving infertility, again, those are very silent kinds of grief because nobody else can see it. Oftentimes, nobody knows that a person is going through infertility treatments. It feels really invisible. It's more of a when we're grieving someone we know, that is a retrospective loss that we can share a past with one another. When we're grieving something we didn't know or someone we didn't know yet, that's a prospective loss. So we're grieving our dreams as well as all these other really subtle things that people can't see.
Okay, thank you very much. Laura, do you have some questions?
Yes, and also from the public. And first, wanted to thank you, Julie, for again being our keynote speaker today, and also for being our personal psychologist. After we lost our first son, conceived through IVF, Daniel Sebastian, and he's the inspiration, for the Baby Bear Foundation. So thanks so much. So infertility is still such a big taboo in many cultures and communities. How can healthcare providers help break the silence and create space for more open and supportive conversations?
I really think we need to start talking about fertility when our patients are young. So like their first, OBGYN visit when they're late teenagers, at least that's what it is in my country. I don't want to make assumptions. Being able to open the conversation of, I know this might be a long time for you, but, have you put any thought into having kids? It's to not wait until someone is 35 years old or 40 years old and be like, oh, you're going to have an egg donor. Like, that's not a useful place to start the conversation. So I think if we can talk more about fertility and what that means and what that looks like, I mean, it can be really hard for adolescents to understand what that looks like. And that, of course, carries into adulthood. I work with a lot of very educated people, and I can't tell you how many have come in and they're saying, well, we're having sex all the time, but I'm not pregnant. And it's like, yeah, you don't actually have to have sex all the time. You can't get pregnant most of the month. There's, 48 hours that are considered to be ideal. But most people, they don't know that. So that can be also really frustrating too. I mean, I go to conference and I bring home swag that's sperm, that's eggs. Oh, I can't reach it, but I have some in my office. It's something really normal that I talk to with my kids. And whenever I go to a conference, so they're like, oh, is this another one for, infertility? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, more sperm? I'm like, yeah, we can get all sorts of fun sperm things. But my kids know the words. They know what this is like. I've been able to talk to them from a really young age. So even as parents, we can talk to our kids about reproduction, because I think part of unstigmatizing infertility is also to destigmatize reproduction and sex. And yes, there are cultures and there are religions that have very specific rules around these kinds of topics. So I understand that it can be difficult to navigate. I mean, I counsel my clients that are going to use donor eggs or donor sperm or donor embryo. They're all like, oh, I'm going to wait till my kid's a teenager before we talk about this. I'm like, oh, please don't. That's probably the worst time to tell anyone anything that is big. So we talk about, okay, what might it be like to talk to them when they're young, when they're toddlers? And my client's like, oh, that's too young to understand sex. I'm like, oh, no, you're not going to talk about sex. You're going to talk about the 3 things people need to have a baby. They need a place for the baby to grow. We can call that a womb or a uterus. They need 2 cells, one from a man and one from a woman. And, if I'm a single parent, like clearly I didn't have a man around, but a very kind man called a donor was able to help me have a cell that I didn't have. I had everything else. So that's not sex.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Julie, menstruation is normal for women, but some people aren't aware of the pain that comes with the arrival of menstruation every month when a woman and her family are trying so hard to get pregnant. It's, as you say, a roller coaster. What do you have? What do you think about this? Do you have any thoughts?
So getting a period is as much of a loss as having a miscarriage. It means that here's another month where it didn't work. Here's another reminder that maybe I'm a failure. And I don't actually believe that about people, but I'm just trying to describe what they tend to feel about themselves. It's a reminder that I'm not pregnant yet. It's a reminder that I didn't stay pregnant. So it tends to be this really um, blatant reminder. It stands out. You have to do something about it. And that makes it really challenging. I think, talking to people about, hey, so some people, when they start to menstruate again, they can find that to be really unsettling. I don't know if that will be your experience, but at least giving them some kind of uh, heads up that this might be, and to normalize it. Yeah, it's normalized. It's normal to see your period and feel disappointed because that's one more month that you're not pregnant.
Yes, I think infertility grief is like a huge ocean of micro griefs every
Absolutely.
month.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a micro grief every month in this process. So we have some other questions.
Okay.
How can someone redefine their identity or life plan when biological motherhood or fatherhood is no longer an option? That's very important.
Yeah. I think too, there's some cultural parts that come into this. So again, I'm speaking about the United States because that is the culture that is my identified culture. And when I think about some of the things that are told to us, like part of it, especially as a woman, is being told you can do anything and, take the time you need for your career. That's really important that you have one. That's not something that you should pass over. And the idea is, yeah, there are so many people getting pregnant in their 40s or late 40s or even early 50s. Oh, I can do that too. And if I don't freeze my eggs when I'm early 30s or late 20s, I'm going to have a much harder time doing that. So if I wanted to wait until I was older because I have things that I'm having in mind that I want to achieve, um, then it becomes even more difficult for me to get pregnant. But I don't think that timeline is a little squishy because it can be a different timeline for different people. I mean, I had a client who was in her 20s when she was starting to try to get pregnant, and she went through 9 rounds of IUIs, intrauterine inseminations, didn't get pregnant. She went through IVF, was able to create lots of embryos, didn't get pregnant. Um, and it wasn't until like we looked at something kind of off the beaten path around, oh, hey, have we looked at your immunology? Maybe that's contributing to it. So there's so many different things. And as I said in the beginning, there's so much we don't know. So immunology is one of those things because the United States doesn't want to study it, but other countries do. So that's good.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Sometimes we don't know what to say to a family going through infertility. What suggestion do you have for emotionally supporting a couple grieving infertility without resorting to empty or harmful phrases?
Okay, so things to not say. Let me start there. You don't necessarily know what a person's religious observances or how comforting religion might feel to that person. So offering any kinds of platitudes like, well, this is God's plan, not useful. There's a small group of people where that might be useful for, but generally not useful. So being able to commiserate statements, and again, this is if you know, because oftentimes fertility and infertility are kept really quiet. So if you know the person and you know about their infertility struggles, you can say, I'm really sorry, or this sucks, right? You can join with them emotionally rather than try to come up with a solution, or have you tried?
Mhm.
Have you tried this supplement? have you tried eating only pineapples? I mean, if it was so easy like that, then REIs wouldn't have a job.
I know that you mentioned a couple of self-care tools during the presentation. Just wonder if there's like any others that you wanna, bring about that could be helpful for either healthcare providers or families going through fertility.
So I'll share a grounding one with you. I mean, there are so many, anything can be a self-care tool. So I don't want to like have it limited for people, but one I use for grounding that's really easy is it's called 5 4 3 2 1. And what that means is 5 is looking around the space you are and finding 5 things that you notice. 4 relates to touch, that kind of feeling, not emotions. So noticing 4 different touches. So right now, my knee is up against my desk, which is made out of wood. So I feel that um, that barrier on my leg. I can feel the pants that I'm wearing on it. I can feel the sweater and the shirt that I'm wearing. So these are again things to feel. 3 would be smells. Oftentimes this is a harder one, but trying to differentiate smell. 2 would be, oh, sorry, 3 are sounds, 2 are smells. That's why it's not. So only 2 smells. Great if you can come up with them. And then the 1 is just an affirmation for yourself. So when I get to 1, it's, I believe in myself, or whatever the affirmation might be. I can get through this. That might be the affirmation.
Thank you, Julie. What an amazing advice. I'm going to start to practice.
Awesome.
How does infertility grief affect a couple's relationship, and what strategies can help maintain emotional connection during this process? I think that this is something important because sometimes couples, the relations broke up with this difficult process. So, what can you suggest to us?
So as I mentioned during the slide presentation, yeah, absolutely. Couples are experiencing this both individually and together. Um, Sex becomes really strained because either you're supposed to abstain at certain points, or it's just not feeling good, or it's another reminder of what you can't have, because we think about sex as a procreative act versus also something that we do to have connection and intimacy and fun. So sex can mean more than just procreation. I think it's really useful to plan things that you're going to plan things around the different cycle milestones. So if when you're having a transfer, when you're getting the results from that, plan to maybe go out to dinner, plan to snuggle on the couch, like whatever it might be, have a concrete plan with one another. At the end of a cycle, when you're waiting to hear, after you hear whether it was successful or not, have a plan. So oftentimes my clients will be like, okay, if I'm not pregnant, I'm going to have a drink. If I am pregnant, I will not have a drink, and maybe I'll have something else. But again, creating that plan for either circumstance can be really, really useful as well. And people don't think about that. I also remind people that the two of you are a unit. You are the foundation of this family. And so what is really important is to keep that foundation steady. Do things that are enjoyable. Do things that do new things to see if you find enjoyment from it. But to not, it's so easy to give up life because fertility treatment is so consuming. It is time consuming. It is thought consuming. And so a lot of times people are like, I just can't. Like, I don't have energy. It's so important to try to make that space for yourselves and for you individually.
Amazing, Julie. Just for end and for close this amazing space, there's another question. What role does guilt play in the infertility grieving process, and how can it be addressed therapeutically?
So I think where guilt comes into play is people want a reason for why things didn't work. And I see this also with pregnancy loss. It's the idea of, oh, I drank that beer and I shouldn't have. That's what caused this infertility cycle to not work. Oh, I inadvertently was 20 minutes late with a shot. That's what caused this cycle not to work. Because if we can find something we can blame it on, then we can correct that next time. And most of the time, it's nothing we did. You know, I'd say almost all of the time, it's nothing we did. And so beating yourself up for it when it's not your fault, but that's something that's really difficult for people, particularly if they're used to blaming themselves when things go wrong, or if that was something that was already instilled in them because of their family.
Amazing. Larry, do you have some more questions?
Not in the present moment. Just, thank Julie so much again for the insights. Thanks again, Fundación Valle Lili, Universidad ICESI for hosting. I think we live with amazing insights, amazing information. So thanks so much.
Thank you for inviting me. This was a pleasure.
So thank you, Dr. Julie Bittman, to the presentation of today, to share this space with us. Thank you also to Laura and Fundación Baby Bear for the support, and of course to the Association of Pediatric of Palliative Care, ASOCUPAC from Colombia, and our hospital that is in Cali, Colombia, Fundación Valle Lili and Universidad ICESI. So I think we can close here this space and have a good day.
Thanks again.
Thanks.